Good afternoon, everyone. Elliot here from ESBR Boxing, joined by my esteemed colleague Gregory Doyle, and we're here to break down the Canelo Alvarez versus the Bivol light heavyweight championship fight coming up in a couple of weeks. So, Gregory, I'd like to reach out first and just ask how you're doing, pal. Are you well?
I'm very well, mate. How are you? Okay.
Not too bad, not too bad. Very well,
Good,
thanks.
good.
So, let me just before we get into it, obviously we've got a couple of subject areas to discuss. Let me just give the blurb, bit of a record blurb for everyone watching. I mean, obviously, Saul Canelo Alvarez doesn't need too much of an introduction to boxing fans. Obviously, unified the super middleweight division. Has campaigned obviously up at light heavy before. Has gone through the weights. Only lost to Floyd Mayweather. 57-1 record with 2 draws. I mean, I say only lost to Floyd Mayweather. Probably have to put an asterisk in there and say, the Triple G fight, etc., etc. But we'll leave that aside. Officially, he's only lost once. And then obviously you come up against Mr. Dmitry Bivol, who is WBA light heavyweight champion. Been champion for some time now. I think it's coming up to 4 or 5 years. Has defended that belt obviously against the likes of Joe Smith, Craig Richards, Pascal Chilemba. And those guys will meet together on the 7th of May at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. So we're here to break it down. The first question I'm going to ask you, Greg, is this one. Is this, in your opinion, Canelo's toughest test to date?
It feels unfair to say no, because I think it's a really, really hard fight. I think it's a harder fight than people even think it is. I would say no, but I'd say it's top 5. I'd definitely say it's top 5, but it's a very, very tough test. And I see a scenario where Canelo loses this, by the way. So that's how hard a fight I think it is.
Because we've obviously seen, I mean, Bivol's not known as a sort of concussive puncher. I mean, he's got his record, obviously, I think is 19 victories, undefeated, but 11 of those by KO. But since he's been a champion, obviously, the names I mentioned already, so Richards, UD, Smith, UD, Pascal Chilemba, all UD victories. So do you see, in order for him to win this fight, then I'm just going to pick you up on that, do you reckon he's going to have to outpoint Canelo, or do you reckon there's any chance, given the weight disparity, that he might be able to stop him, given the record that he's also got?
Yeah. Do you know something? Now that you say that, Elliot, it's a strange one, because see, if you look at Bivol's early part of his career, he was a monster. He was stopping everyone. And then it seems as though he matured a little bit when he stepped up in class, and he just thought, I'm just going to start 120, 108 guys. And he's kind of went down that route. And when you go down that route, some of these fighters, they'll lose their killer instinct and they rely on their natural abilities, which isn't a bad thing. But I think this fight is so important that they both hurt each other. But I think if Bivol was going to try and do anything in this fight, I think he would try and outpoint Canelo on the back foot.
We've seen Canelo obviously fight up this division before. We've seen him fight Sergey Kovalev. Now, obviously, in that fight, he scored an 11-round knockout victory. It was quite a tight turnaround for Kovalev. I remember he fought Yarde, I think it was in the August, and then fought Canelo in November. So I didn't really have a lot of a break between them. But do you think this represents a harder fight then for Canelo to fight Bivol at this stage, in the condition he'll be coming in with the rest he will have, than it was when he stepped up to face Kovalev?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I think a prime Kovalev beats a prime Bivol. I think Kovalev was an absolute killer, but I think a certain part of me thinks that Canelo maybe just got him at the right time. There was the makings there that he was slowing down a bit. I mean, Anthony Yarde, although he massively outpointed Anthony Yarde up to the stoppage, there was a point where Yarde had him all over the place. He had shown signs that he wasn't the force that he used to be. But I'm going to go out on one now. I know that if you look at the scorecards for Canelo and Kovalev, I think they were relatively close. I'm going to say that this is a tougher fight for Canelo, because Bivol hasn't really looked close to being beat. Elliot, I know that he had a little bit of a tight run with Craig Richards at times, but see, for me, that was Bivol in second gear. That wasn't a guy who was desperate and had to go out and retain his title. I think he just underestimated Craig Richards and thought, I'm going to beat him in second gear here. And that's with all due respect to Craig Richards. I just think Bivol's a very good fighter.
No, you mentioned it, obviously the scorecards, because of course, just out of interest, the scorecards going into obviously to when it finished with Canelo was he was looking at 94-96, 94-96, and then 95-95 against Kovalev there. So it's a very close fight, and I think obviously he kind of got him down the stretch a bit, but Kovalev jabbing away was actually proving quite a sticking point for Canelo in that fight, wasn't it? I think he was a bit wary of getting caught by Kovalev as well. I'm actually going to point there, because you're a guy that also taught. I mean, you've obviously boxed previously, and you've talked before on these videos about the importance or the difference in a fighter that will fight if he's feeling not necessarily anxiety, but he's feeling a bit of fear going into a fight? And what I'm asking you is, just picking up on that, do you think who out of Canelo and Bivol in this fight do you think will be feeling that more, feeling that occasion more, feeling that sense of nervousness more going into this, and why do you reckon that would be?
I think Bivol will be more worried, and I think it's because Canelo is now, he knows that he's pound for pound number one in boxing. He's got that sense of invincibility about him. I think he thinks that if he's at his best, nobody's going to live with him in boxing, which isn't a bad way to be, but I think Bivol knows that this could be his coming out party. Everyone respects Bivol. They know that he's a very good fighter, but he's not quite got that name that makes everyone go, wow. Everyone looks at him in a division with Beterbiev, previously Kovalev, Joe Smith. They don't look at Bivol as if, well, he's the number one standout in that division. This fight, he can prove it. So I think, to answer your question, I think Bivol will have more of a bit of a fear about him.
Let's say that Bivol turns up, he wins the decision, either decision or he wins the fight somehow, late stoppage or decision. Do you think a loss to Bivol at a weight that's arguably at the limit, I suppose, really, where Canelo should be fighting, do you reckon that'll affect his legacy long term, or do you see this when he campaigns at these sort of weights as being really a bit of a free shot to extend the legacy rather than anything that can damage him if he loses?
I think with how harsh the world is these days, I think it massively affects his legacy. I think it probably shouldn't, because he started off at 154 and he's now fighting at 175. So it shouldn't affect it. But with how harsh the world is and the high expectancy that a lot of people have got, I think it would. Because the minute, if he loses this decision, everyone is going to say, keep him away from Beterbiev. Maybe even not let him fight at super middle, let him go back down to middle. So the world's very, very critical. So I think it would affect his legacy, but I don't think it should, because this is a fight that he doesn't need to take. He could skip by this and go for Artur Beterbiev, which is probably a more lucrative fight. But do you know what? He's stepping up and he's taking a guy that nobody really wants to fight. So fair play to him.
That is a very interesting point and also very true. I'm just thinking, so if we look at it, either result obviously is possible here, but if we look at it, let's say that Canelo, let's take each fighter in turn, and if they win, they lose, and see where they're kind of going to go from here. So if Canelo wins, becomes obviously light heavyweight champion to add to the other belts he's got in the other divisions. Where do you see him going from here? Do you see him campaigning again, continuing to campaign at light heavyweight, like you mentioned? Obviously, there's Beterbiev, there's other. He's obviously the champion up there with concussive punch up there as well. Do you see him taking on that challenge, or do you see him maybe coming back down to super middle? Obviously there's even middleweights open to him as well. Where do you see him, if he wins from here, where do you see him going?
My understanding is that he's contracted to fight Golovkin if he wins this fight, and my understanding as well is that it's at super middleweight for Canelo's title. So as far as I'm aware of, that has to be the next step for him. But to answer your question, see if he beats Golovkin, I see him going back to 175 and looking for Beterbiev. I really think that that's the next step. But if he wins this, as far as I'm aware of, from what I've been reading, it's contractual that he goes down to fight Golovkin. Whether the contractual part is super middleweight, I don't know. But as far as I'm aware of, that seems to be agreed.
Let's just touch on that. I know we're doing a preview, obviously, between Canelo and Bivol. But let's just touch on the Canelo Triple G trilogy fight, proposed trilogy fight. If I want to get your thoughts quickly, is that a fight that you necessarily want to see, given what you saw recently with Triple G versus Murata? Do you think that's a fight that can be competitive for Triple G now? Do you see any way, given kind of how the first two played out, even with regards to the scoring, that Triple G can win that fight? Or is in many ways that just kind of a fight really that's going to dent Triple G's legacy more than it will Canelo's?
Yeah, I think if I'm advising Golovkin, I'm advising Golovkin not to take that fight. If I'm telling you honestly, everyone's got different opinions about the two fights they had. I think Golovkin won the first, and I think Canelo just pipped him in the second. If there's a third fight, I didn't like how much Triple G had slowed down against Murata. He still looked good at times, the power's still there, but Canelo's kind of in his prime now, whereas I love the both of them, by the way. I love Canelo and I love Golovkin, love them both. But I've always had the strong opinion, you know this, that I think Canelo avoided a prime Triple G. I really do. I think they watched until he slowed down a bit and then he moved up to middleweight and took him at that point. I don't want to see it because I don't think it's a prime Golovkin, and I think it's only going to harm Golovkin's legacy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So going on to that as well, I suppose, if Canelo loses, then obviously he fights Triple G. respective in the next fight. Say, although he's come through that again, do you see him campaigning exclusively then at super middleweight? Or do you, if he loses to Bivol here and then goes down and beats Triple G, do you see him ever raising up to this height again, or do you see him just sticking around from that point onwards then to super middle and middleweight?
I think he would go back up to light heavy for the right fight, Elliot. I think he'd probably stay at super middle. Whether he would be adventurous to go up and take Beterbiev if he lost to Bivol, it's different styles. And if I believe that if he loses to Bivol, it would be getting outboxed. Whereas Beterbiev's thing is he's a puncher, and some punchers, Canelo knows how to eat them for fun. So it's a tough one, but I see him maybe staying at super middle until the right opportunity came up at light heavy again.
I'm just going to have to pick you up here as well and just say it's on the spot thing. Obviously, it's theoretical. They're not arranging to fight. But do you see Canelo beating Beterbiev, or do you see it as being obviously? Do you see it that being a harder fight than the Bivol fight essentially for Canelo?
Yeah. I see Canelo stopping Beterbiev. Styles make fights here, and look at Callum Smith hurt Beterbiev. And for me, the way to beat Beterbiev is, this is going to sound crazy, and I know this, right? But I think it's to stand relatively close to him, but be able to move your upper body and see when he throws, move back and counter him. Nobody's better at doing that than Canelo. So I've watched this, and I think if Canelo gets caught by Beterbiev, it could be a very, very hard fight. But he's shown a dynamite chin as well, hasn't he?
Yeah.
So it's difficult, but I'll be honest, I don't know why. I've just always seen Canelo stopping him. I just think styles make fights, and I think Canelo's style was just all wrong for Beterbiev.
And I think that I would love to see it. I can also see it potentially happening, but I would love to see that fight as well. We've moved from Canelo onto Bivol then. He's obviously 31 years old now. If he wins this fight, where do you see him going? Do you see him a potential unification fight with Beterbiev himself? Is there another fight out there necessarily for him? Or just give me your thoughts on where you see him going if he does win.
That's the next fight for me. I think that they would make the fight against Beterbiev. It's like an all-Russia affair. I know that Beterbiev kind of resides in Canada now. That's where most of his fights and things are. But I think that's an actual fight. It would be a unification. He could go for Joe Smith. He's already beat Joe Smith, but it's a fight that he can win again. And it's going to be a positive if he beats Joe Smith again, because Joe Smith's put one or two good wins together. But I see it being Beterbiev. I think whoever wins this fight. Yes, Canelo is contracted to fight Golovkin, but I think Beterbiev is the actual. I think he's the diamond for both of them. If whoever wins this fight,
if let's say Canelo wins and Bivol loses his belt, which is 31, obviously he can continue to fight for some years, come again. Do you see where do you see him going from them? And obviously there's some other names that are sort of rising in that division. Some British guys, obviously you've got Callum Smith, Yard, Buatsi, even like you say, there's Ramirez down there. Do you see Bivol as a standing alone, probably the second best or the best in that division? Do you see that he can come again and become world champion, or do you think any of those guys can essentially replace him in the rankings?
I think it will depend the way that he loses, Elliot, because I've heard, I don't know if you've heard these rumours, I hear that Bivol can make super middle comfortable, and he's up at light heavyweight, so it could even look to go down. At 31, you know yourself, when you get to these ages and things, it's difficult to keep your weight at a certain level, but he could even go down to super middle. It wouldn't surprise me, but if he was coming back, I think it could be somebody like Joe Smith he would come back against, but it really depends how he loses. If it's a close points defeat, absolutely I see him back. If he gets stopped, I don't know. Sometimes a stoppage changes a fighter. They're never quite the same. They don't have the same belief. They've not got the same invincibility. So if it's a points loss, I see it maybe being Joe Smith. If it is a stoppage, I just see him randomly coming back on a DAZN card against maybe a top 50. See how it goes from there and what he's got left. I'm
going to come to you for a prediction after this next question, but what I was actually thinking when you were talking there about actually to do with Canelo and Golovkin was essentially about picking fighters at the right time. Now, Bivol's only had 19 pro fights, which is quite a few, but it's not too many. Essentially compared to Alvarez, who's got sort of 57 wins on his record. Do you think, but he's also 31, so you're sort of thinking athletically he's probably in his prime around this stage. So how do you think that trade-off works? You reckon he's looked at Bivol and gone, maybe there's not the experience there, there's not the punch power there, despite the age that he's got? or do you think it would have made more sense essentially to maybe take Triple G and then wait maybe a year? He might have another fight down the way. He might not be champion, I suppose, after then. Do you think? I suppose what I'm trying to get there is: do you think that he's chosen Bivol at the right time, Canelo here, or do you reckon actually he should have probably waited a little bit longer to go up there and challenge for this belt?
I think if there was ever going to be a time that you get Bivol, it's now. Because if you watch the history of boxing, Elliot, these big fights always happen when a fighter looks as though there's just a slight blip there. They've watched him fighting Craig Richards. He didn't look great against Richards. That looks like a possibility of a belt you can pick up. You look at Mayweather when he fought Pacquiao. Pacquiao obviously had the drama with Marquez and things before that. Nobody wanted to know. These guys who are at the pinnacle of sport, I think Canelo would fight anybody anywhere. I don't think he necessarily waits for someone to slip, but I think their teams do. And I think they've seen Bivol and they know that he's a very good fighter, but he's got a belt and he didn't look great against Craig Richards. And I think that they're thinking, if they get that belt, that puts them in a prime position to be the A side against somebody like Beterbiev, for example. So, yeah, that's what I think.
Excellent. So it's come to that time with the show where I know obviously you are deserving the reputation of prediction specialist for ESBR. I don't want to put you on the spot here necessarily because obviously it's quite a way out away from the fight. I know you like to look at the guys' fight week, like to see what sort of shape they're in, etc. Understandably so, but I just want to come and just ask you sort of for a loose, I suppose, a preliminary real prediction before we get into your deeper analysis next week, and that is, how do you see this fight playing out? Who do you see winning, and if possible, how?
Something like I might shock you here. I don't know. I think it's such a hard fight. I think people don't realise how hard a fight this is. Kovalev was outboxing Canelo at times. Something I've never seen happening. Bivol's a better boxer than Kovalev. See if he can avoid getting hit by Canelo. But this is the one thing I also see. I've envisioned this fight, and I see Bivol coming in, throwing 3 or 4, and Canelo counting over the top. For Canelo to win this fight, it's so important that he hurts Bivol. It's so important. If he lets Bivol get 4 or 5 up and he's not hurt him, I think it might start getting the desperation stages. I really do. If I was pushed, I see Canelo on points after he's put down Bivol once or twice, because if he puts Bivol down, Bivol's not going to have the same adventurous style to go forward and put the fight on Canelo. So if I was pushed at the moment, I really don't know, because I can't get the Kovalev Canelo scorecard out of my head until the stoppage came. I would say Canelo in a very hard fight after he's maybe dropped Bivol once or twice, but I think they could be the determining factors in the fight.
I am, to be honest, having spoken to you when I first had this fight with Canelo, it's obviously a competitive fight. Good fight. Want to see, obviously, watch Canelo fight anyone essentially, but also I'm looking at, you look at it and you think these guys top of the sport, like almost with Mayweather, you kind of just get complacent. You think obviously Canelo will win. If it comes down to points, he'll win. But now you're actually saying this, you look at the record and you look at the previous fights, you're actually sitting there thinking it is significantly closer than I think a lot of people are giving it credit for.
Absolutely.
And you're sitting there going, how can it, you can't, can I make an argument for Canelo stopping Bivol? Probably. Like you say, he didn't look great against Richards, but then Bivol's not been stopped, undefeated at the same time, so you haven't seen it happen. And then you're looking at it going, with the style he's got as well, and what you were saying about Kovalev outboxing Canelo, which is true for parts of that fight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like the more you mention it, the more it actually is hard to sit here and go, I reckon anyone's going to win. Clearly in my mind, it's not a clear prediction, is it, at the same time at this stage? It's not a clear prediction. I'm probably just going to err towards Canelo just because, on points, probably just because it's in America. Canelo's obviously favoured on the sort of judges, the way things are going anyway. So it's like probably that for that reason only. But equally, I could quite easily see this fight going either way, frankly. I think it'd be a hell of a fight, to be honest. For boxing purists as well, it'd be a hell of a fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Elliot, trust me, it's so important that Canelo hurts him in this fight. So important. If Canelo doesn't hurt him, I don't know, man. I think he either needs to hurt him and stop him, or hurt him and take the adventurous part of his game right away. If he takes that away, he'll outpoint Bivol and could stop him, but he needs to hurt him. It's so important. So important. I envision it. I can just see it. He needs to hurt him.
Brilliant. Thank you very well. Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you as always for joining us to break down the Canelo Bivol fight, which happens on the 7th of May. If you guys sharing our predictions or have any sort of thoughts and feedback, please obviously comment. Hope you enjoy the video, and we'll be back soon with more content. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. Cheers, bud.